Welcome back to another episode of Sketch Nerds, brought to you by Bad Medicine, DC's best sketch comedy about the worst of humanity. Here on Sketch Nerds, we break down sketch comedy. What works, what doesn't work, what we like, what we don't like, and why. Today, we're going to be discussing sketches from The Human Giant and Mr. Show. You can find information about this podcast, as well as the sketches we are going to be discussing, at badmedicinecomedy.com/sketchnerds. Joining me, as always, are Seth and then returning co-host Michael Alvino. I'm Andy Weld, and today we are happy to have on as a guest Sarah Bell. Sarah, how are you doing today?
Doing good. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. We're happy to have you. Can you tell us about your background in comedy and kind of the comedy you're doing now?
Sure. Yeah. I am in a sketch comedy group called Frankie, and we're based here in DC. We perform at Dojo Comedy, and I also co-teach a sketch writing class at Dojo with Jen Kovach.
Cool. How long have you been teaching the class for?
That's a good question. A few years, I think.
That's awesome.
Started teeing it and then teaching it. So it's been a while.
Nice. You're really getting that promotion, right?
Yeah.
It was a little scary to start out, and you found your place?
That's right.
Oh,
that's
good.
Right. Full-fledged teacher now.
Wow. You get a certificate and everything?
There's no certificate. I should ask.
Oh, I don't think you've actually gotten promoted. I think it's a ruse.
Oh, no.
Well, I think the big deal is that now, as a TA, you have to grade a lot of sketches. But as a full-on sketch writing professor, you just get to do the fun stuff, and then your TA has to grade all the sketches.
So we've gone from teacher to professor now.
I assume that's how it works. I assume
That's
that
right.
everybody who teaches a comedy class is a professor of comedy.
Inching ever onwards. Introducing our first sketch today is Sarah.
All right. Well, the sketch I wanted to talk about is just a personal favorite of mine that makes me laugh a lot every time I watch it. It's a sketch called Corn Maze by Human Giant. And Human Giant was a sketch comedy show on MTV that aired in 2007 to 2008. It consisted of Paul Scheer, Rob Hubel, and Aziz Ansari. And I just wanted to talk about this sketch because it's just delightfully weird and absurd and makes me laugh every time. So
this just isn't working. Something's got to change.
But you still want to see me, right?
Sometimes, I guess.
I don't understand.
Look, why don't we talk out in the backyard? I'll meet you in the corn maze.
Okay.
I'm just gonna get my jacket.
All right, Sarah, why don't you tell us what you liked about that sketch? What specifically really brings that out for you?
Well, lately, I think I've kind of been drawn to more absurdist sketches where something, comes out of left field and is a really weird surprise. Just because that's not how I typically tend to approach my own sketch writing. Like, I think a lot of times my stuff is like more grounded in, I'll start with something in pop culture or like something in politics or something that's annoying me and sort of find a structure that works for it and flesh it out. And it's not always like making a statement with a capital S, but it's like pretty clear where I'm coming from. And this one I think is just a great like absurdist little vignette. And I think the process behind it is more mysterious, and that intrigues me. Like, because I like to, I teach this sketch writing formats class, so I like to kind of get in there and like pick apart the structure and what makes it work. And so I decided to take one of my favorites and destroy it by picking it apart.
So is it that absurdity that makes it work? Is there something specific that makes it work in your eyes?
I think it's the absurdity maybe paired with a really relatable premise. So it does start with Rob Hubel is breaking up with his girlfriend and they're in the kitchen and he's like, something's not working. It's just not right. She's like, you still want to see me sometimes. It's like, I guess. So he's really kind of wishy-washy.
Also, kind of a weird conversation to have. Like, I feel like that part of the conversation, you still want to see me, I guess. I feel like that is where that conversation would kind of end, right? Like,
Right.
If you said that to someone, they'd be like, well, I don't want to see you anymore if that's your attitude.
Yeah, I
Right.
guess isn't good enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think, it's a pretty relatable scenario where it's like this relationship status is kind of unclear. So he's like metaphorically sending her into the corn maze, right? And then that sort of becomes literal
Right.
when she actually wanders into a creepy corn maze in the back of his apartment building that looks like it's in Brooklyn or something. Like
Right. The building is very city, and then it's this like field of
Humongous corn
dreams.
maze, yeah.
Well, I'd like to think that the sketch exists in the same reality as Field of Dreams. Like there was a voice that told him to build for a completely different purpose.
James
than
Earl
Kevin
Jones was
Costner.
there.
So I just want to in this universe, then there are good things you can do with a cornfield and bad things you can do with a cornfield.
Right, like there's
Yeah.
a good voice and a bad voice.
So I'm assuming then that the Children of the Corn and that kid from that Twilight Zone episode also exist in this universe.
I'll give you that.
Okay.
I haven't seen those.
Oh,
Yeah.
all right. Yes.
I think Ghost Baseball? That's what Field of Dreams is, right?
Field of Dreams.
Yeah,
Yes, Field of Dreams.
Ghost
That's right.
Baseball,
That's the
good.
Japanese translation of the
Yeah,
title
exactly.
of Field of Dreams.
Yeah.
Ex-girlfriend corn maze, bad.
Ex-girlfriend corn maze.
Yeah.
I just love the way he says corn maze. It's
Oh,
just corn maze. And then just this, this
Even more intensity than that. It's I feel like we're all gonna end up going around in a circle.
We
saying,
should. Let's.
We should all
"Corn
say it.
maze."
Corn maze.
Corn maze.
and it really is. You're sort of like if the other presumably ex-girlfriend hadn't been in there, like it's almost about to become a Friday the 13th movie.
Oh, yeah.
One would think.
Yeah.
I think what was great about seeing that other woman in the corn maze is that she's running. Or she's like running around looking. It's not like she's like meandering. It looks like she's like actively looking around still for Rob Hubel. Like, where is he still? And how long has she been in the corn maze?
He said he was just going to get his jacket.
Right?
Yeah.
He did not have a jacket on when he looked out the window.
I assume that's why he puts them in a corn maze, because at least in a corn maze there is food available, right? They won't starve in
Can
that
you
corn
eat
maze.
raw corn off the cob?
Yes. I don't know that it's not going to have pesticides on it or bugs and dirt, but I believe you can just eat it right off the cob.
I'm glad we're doing a deep dive on corn.
Yep.
Yeah.
Cornfields, raw corn. It's good to get in that. It's a really short sketch, but I think one of the things that really punctuates it is the musical choice.
Yes.
Mm.
As the woman wanders into the corn maze. It's the Moonlight Sonata, Beethoven. Yes?
Oh boy.
Yes.
Classical music is not.
I
Question
think it's
for the
a
classical music
romantic,
nerds podcast.
yeah. Which I think is a romantic song, but it like, but it's so haunting that
Yeah.
it adds to just kind of, it's creepy, but not in a skin crawly way. It's
Yeah.
Corn maze.
There are definitely like some horror genre touches in the sketch
Mhm.
that I think add to it and work well. I like the way he floats up into the window. Like he just kind of like his head like rises up from the bottom of the window. And then the music starts playing and it intensifies. And the sinister way he whispers. And it's not something as like fleshed out as like a full-on like genre parody. And I think that would
Right.
kill it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's just got those elements to it.
And so when you're writing something, Sarah, do you write genre parody sketches or do you use elements of them, and kind of what can they bring to a sketch when used lightly?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I think that's a thing that I like to use. Now I'm trying to think of an example, but a format I like to write a lot is commercials. And I
Mhm.
think there's genres of commercials.
Sure, yeah.
And if you can get that voice right, where it's an infomercial or it's an ad for a lawyer or it's a political ad, there's different genre touches that you would use for each type of commercial. And I think those can be a helpful thing because it sort of locates the viewer or the audience member like in this recognizable format, recognizable place. And so they have a set of expectations that comes with the genre,
Mhm.
and you can surprise them or you can use that to your joke's advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And one of the other things that I noticed in this sketch is the way that there is despite it being about a minute and 20 seconds, it does still feel like there's a distinct game that happens. It doesn't feel like it's just like flashes in your face and then it ends. There's like, you do feel escalation. And Michael, can you speak to that a little bit? How there is a game throughout the sketch, even though it's so short?
I don't know. I mean, I guess so. You're talking about basically the setup is based in reality. It's the breakup scene,
Right.
Obviously there's this douchebag character that is very relatable, at least in pop culture. I feel like.
For you, Michael?
Oh yeah, I definitely identify. But I don't know if there is a game element to it because it's so unpredictable. Yeah. I think the game. You're thinking about like pattern and heightening. This like it heightens. That's the absurdity is the way that it heightens and the twist that it takes.
Sure. Seth, what do you think?
I think that we do get a little bit, as Michael was saying, we start with reality, we move into absurdity, and for me, then it heightens when we see the second woman in the corn maze, and then when we pull back and see how big the corn maze is, and the suggestion that there might be perhaps up to dozens of other women wandering around this endless corn maze, waiting for Rob Hubel to return with his jacket.
Sarah, you picked this. Sorry?
Oh, no, I was just going to, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was thinking about the structure of it as also something that appeals to me. And thinking about it format-wise, I mean, I don't know, like Michael said, I don't know that there's a game of like repeated behavior. I think it's a single joke. And when we teach our formats class, one of the formats we teach is a Blackout Sketch. And I don't know that you necessarily have to reduce everything to like a type of format, and I don't want to do that and be reductive, but I think functionally it's a blackout because it is just it's a single joke, like acted out in a sketch. And there's a setup and a punchline. But what they do that's interesting to me is they extend the punchline a couple beats. And I think it works, Like usually I think like, oh, you have your punchline and you want to end it. Like get your big laugh line, end the sketch. And the biggest laugh line for me is when he says corn maze. But then they just sort of let it breathe and like let the weirdness settle in. And then they reveal how big the corn maze is. And it just extends it a couple beats past where you think it's going. And I think that is something surprising and interesting about it that works well, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that that reveal of the large corn maze is really critical to the end of that sketch being okay for past the laugh line. And when I said earlier that I felt there was a game in there, I guess the game that I saw was when Rob Hubel first mentions, "I'll go meet you in the corn maze," and then the woman is in front of the corn maze, and then Rob Hubel says, "Corn maze." And even just repeating the phrase corn maze, which is something I don't think I've said in over a year probably before talking about this sketch, even that little use of that 2-word phrase in the three different contexts, the first time it's said, the visual, the second time it's said, feels like a game to me.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I could see that. I mean, it's a really weird thing to say. Like, why don't we talk about this in the corn maze?
Yeah,
like, that's just...
And
this seems like more
unfazed by it.
Right.
Yeah, she's like, oh, yeah, the corn maze, yeah.
Yeah, if anything, she's maybe a little hurt. She's a little bewildered, but not about the fact of the corn maze. She's confused that they're going to continue this conversation in the corn maze, which suggests to me that she's seen it before in a different context.
Right.
Right.
Well, I think like I've been wondering like what makes something absurdist comedy. Like any comedy sketch is going to have something unusual. That's otherwise it would just be acting. I don't know what just regular TV. It wouldn't be funny. Yeah, but like the absurdity, I guess what distinguishes it is the number of questions left unanswered, like why the corn maze is, like of all those questions you just rambled off, like
Right.
how many women are in this?
Yeah.
Why does, and then why does, and I think the accepting of the reality when he's like, I'll meet you in the corn maze. And she's like, okay, like,
Yeah.
like that's the reality that we live in. I'm going to meet you in the corn maze. And then, why does he say corn maze? Why is the corn maze there? You never get the answers to those questions. And instead of like that satisfaction you get when when something predictable, like a game is hit the third time, like it's just like the questions start firing in your brain and there's no answer and you're still tickled. You're like,
Always leave them
Yeah.
wanting more and leave people asking questions about, wait a minute.
right.
What happened there, especially in comedy?
Always
Yeah.
leave them wanting more is a line that was cut
Mhm.
while they're in the corn maze.
Yes.
Maybe that's why Rob Hubel's so attractive. Dude owns a corn maze.
That it could be. That's if it's in the middle of Brooklyn, it's got to
Right.
be worth a lot of money.
Yes.
Or is he
Yeah.
the guy from S-Town? No.
Oh, yeah.
Oh man. Yeah.
Let's not talk about other podcasts on this podcast. Sarah, this is a great sketch. I think we all really enjoy it. But was there anything that you would change or do differently, either as a writer or as a performer or as a viewer, as something you'd like to see different?
Oh, interesting. No, I obviously,
It's
I chose
perfect. We're
this sketch
done.
because it's one of my favorites. So I hesitate to say I'd change it. I'm out of my own curiosity. Like, I'd be interested to see a version where maybe they reverse a couple of the beats. Like, I think if you see her going into the corn maze, see the other woman, then he says corn maze, and then it
Yeah.
pulls back and like ends a little bit sooner after that punchline. Maybe.
Mhm.
But then I think, I don't know if that would work as well.
It does
I
seem
just
to
would be curious
yeah.
to like see how it
Sure.
works the other way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Would you want to see like that character again?
the corn maze.
Because like
character?
if there was another, or Rob Hubel's character, if there was another beat where he, like if he's at the water cooler and his coworker's like, well, what'd you do this weekend? And like in his head, he's just like, corn maze.
Or
Oh, nothing.
or something where he's going on a date with another woman, and at the very end he turns around like Michael Jackson at the end of Thriller, and there's that demonic laugh coming out of nowhere because you know what's going to happen.
Right.
Corn maze.
Or I could see a follow-up sketch where you have all of the women who have been left in the corn maze trying to figure out what's going on. Like most of them hopeful that Rob Hubel is just around the corner with his jacket.
Or like they bump into each other. Like, oh, sorry, I'm just waiting for my boyfriend.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm waiting for my boyfriend too. It's no big deal.
Yeah, I would definitely like to see that character again, as long as we get no answers about the
Oh
corn
yeah,
maze.
absolutely.
Yeah.
No, we can't get any.
No answers. And I think to close out this, we should all say corn maze just one more time. Michael, why don't you start us off?
Corn maze.
Corn maze.
Corn maze.
Corn maze.
This podcast is brought to you by the sketch comedy troupe Bad Medicine, DC's best sketch comedy about the worst of humanity. Visit badmedicinecomedy.com for info about live shows, workshops, and t-shirts for people who love comedy.
And now to talk about sketch number 2 today, here is Seth Alcorn.
Hello, everyone. Sketch number 2 is Pre-Taped Call-In Show from Mr. Show with Bob and David. Mr. Show with Bob and David ran on HBO from 1995 to 1998, and it introduced Loving America not only to Bob Odenkirk and David Cross, but also a short list: Paul F. Tompkins, Scott Aukerman, Brian Posehn, Dino Stamopoulos, I think I might have pronounced that incorrectly, Tom Kinney, Mary Lynn Ricegub, and Jack Black and Patton Oswalt sometimes showed up on that show. So that was it's a kind of an all-star cast for that one.
It really was.
Yes. The show in general tends to bring frustrated, angry absurdity to its sketches. This sketch is a great example of that. There are others. I don't want to list them because we're probably going to talk about them later, and some of them even might be discussed more fully on the show. I would go so far as to say that they lean heavily towards the surreal and tend to like breaking the fourth wall in perhaps an indirect way or doing something to remind us that we're all sort of participating in a piece of entertainment. David Cross in particular, I think, is at his best when he plays either people at the end of their sanity or else so firmly in denial that no amount of evidence can shake their worldview. And he sort of splits the difference on this one. He's got a little bit of both going on. And he's in really good form as a man driven nearly insane by his refusal to change his game plan when it ceases to work. I think I'm going to leave what else I was going to say afterwards for the discussion portion. But here's a little clip from that sketch.
No, I'm not doing a show about pet care. I'm doing a show about the elderly. The people calling about racism are watching the show that aired when we were taping the pet show, which is airing now, okay? If they wanted to talk about racism, they should have called 3 weeks ago when our Crime in the Street show aired, okay? It's just, let's think before we...
Well, David Cross is not having a good time there.
No, and he rarely is, really.
Yeah, that's true. It's definitely one of his strong suits. Now, Seth, what's your favorite thing about this sketch?
My favorite thing about the sketch is that it moves backward in time.
Explain.
Okay, well, we start on I believe it's week 4 of a call-in show, a pre-taped call-in show, and we see that the host is really frustrated because people continue to call in to talk about the last week's show. As it is a pre-taped call-in show, the last week's show is airing when he's filming the current show, so nobody who's watching him knows what he's actually talking about. And at the very end of the sketch, we see clips from all of the previous shows with David Cross in various stages of frustration that people do not understand what the show's about because they haven't been paying attention to what he's been saying on the other pre-taped shows.
And it's just as clear as that visually.
Yes, it really is.
In words.
Yes.
It took me like at least the full sketch of basically just trying to process what was going on as I was watching this.
Yeah. I wanted to like draw myself a diagram of like week to week.
Because I felt like, so you talked about you loved how it goes backwards, which made me think of Memento.
Yes.
And the first time I watched Memento was with my mother, and she just kept like pausing it and rewinding it and being like, what's going on? Who is this guy?
Yeah. I think the brilliant thing about it is that it comes together. Like that was a big gamble, I think, to take on that sketch working, and it pays off wonderfully.
One of the things that works in this sketch is that it's funny. David Cross's frustration is funny. And then as you realize it's moving backwards in time, it becomes funnier. Even if it doesn't click for you exactly what's going on, even if it is a little confusing and it takes a watch or two, which it may have taken for me to get exactly what was going on, you're still laughing because he's still so funny. David Cross is so exasperated, and that is often when he's at his best, as you said, when he is really at his wits' end.
I honestly wonder about the evolution of that sketch if they didn't start off with it going forward. Because it's still funny if you watch it forward, if you're like, okay, here's a guy with a pre-taped call-in show. How's this going to work? Oh, nobody calls in the first week because nobody knows that there's a show happening. Okay, that's fine. And then we see him go from week to week and getting progressively balder and progressively more frustrated with what's happening. And then somebody just said, well, wait, what if we did that backwards? And we showed all of the previous stuff at the end. I just love this sketch so much.
Well, it's the subversion of the sketch type. And Sarah, as you talked about in the previous segment about a Blackout Sketch, and this is, I'm not exactly sure what type, but you teach a class. Maybe would you have a name for what you would call this sketch, either moving forward or backwards?
Oh, well, it's a talk show, I suppose, which is a variation on like a receptionist shopkeeper where there's like a repeated pattern of behavior, and it just goes backwards in a brilliant way. I think the pacing of it is great too. Like it starts out kind of the first segment, it's like a slow burn, like as he's getting more and more exasperated, and then it gets more rapid when they start going from like the previous week and then the previous week and then the previous week, and it's like joke. It's just like, it's great.
Yeah, I think that's actually one of the things that works best is that when he gets to the point where he pulls out the TV to show a clip of the previous show. The second that happens, the previous David Cross is pulling out a TV to show a clip of the previous show, and then it happens again, and then it happens again. And it's just, the timing on that is absolutely perfect. We didn't need to see anything else of the previous shows other than what we were seeing. And the sort of the nice part about that is that it doesn't work, but he keeps doing it. Like, he's been so frustrated on almost every other show that he has dragged out the monitor to show his audience what he's talking about, and it doesn't work, but he keeps doing it.
But it's so satisfying that it goes backwards, that you see him on the very first episode when he's like, well, maybe it'll be better next time.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Once we'll have some
Once we get all the wrinkles.
And the dramatic irony
out,
of the audience knowing that it's not going to get better for David Cross.
It is not. Oh, man.
Michael, the way his appearance changes as we see him move backwards in time is really striking. How does either changing a character's appearance, whether it's through flashbacks or something like that, how can that add to the comedy of a sketch?
Well, I think it speaks to, like, mining every opportunity you have for a joke. When you have the premise of the sketch, which is very convoluted, and it's already high concept. To the credit of the writers, you should still be looking for every opportunity you can to fit in any joke, in a sight gag, especially in something like this where you're talking about a period of 4 weeks. I mean, to be honest, I didn't even notice that the first time I watched it. But you layer in those things and you give different audiences something to laugh at, repeated watching, something to laugh at.
Well, it makes me think of kind of your classic setup for comedy would be setup, payoff.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think Mr. Show is a good example, and kind of often it seems kind of cutting edge sketch group, whether it's Monty Python or Fry and Laurie or Mr. Show, move past that setup, payoff, and it's payoff. And your payoffs are setups for your future payoffs.
That's just what I was thinking. Every time he pulls out a TV, it is a payoff of the previous time he's pulled out a TV and a setup for the next time he's going to pull out a TV.
Whoa.
Yeah.
It's the turducken of...
Yes. I think this is comedy inception is what's happened. And it's brilliant.
So what is his show? Because the topics for each week are wildly different. Like, what is the show
now
about?
Let's talk about that a little bit, because it's crime in the streets, racism, pets, and then the elderly. So we start off with two, very serious topics onto something lighter, sort of dipping back into serious.
And then cooking, I believe.
And then cooking is next week, is planned to be next week.
Well,
he's not going to make it. I don't think that character's going to last until the cooking show. He's just in bad shape. Andy, I think you were saying that it looks like he ages about 10 years in those 4 weeks.
It's like when you see like pictures of presidents when they started and ended their time as president.
Yeah.
And they just look horrible.
Yeah, Kennedy.
Okay, that's too soon.
I don't think anybody's seen a picture. Well, most people haven't seen pictures of when Kennedy's presidency was over.
No.
Next joke.
Yes, that's right. I'm gonna
Michael.
I'm still laughing.
Need you to push away from the table and move back into the left.
People still get a little testy about Abraham Lincoln assassination jokes.
Oh yeah, I was in an
that was
improv
a
show where a
tragedy.
friend of mine did a graphic Abraham Lincoln, and the audience, you could just hear them go, and it was like it wasn't.
And no one cares about James Garfield.
Johnny Cash did. He sang a song about it.
I think that was about the cat. Garfield?
Yeah, it might have been about the cat.
probably.
Garfield. You're right. Yeah,
Probably.
Okay.
Sarah, when you're writing a sketch, do you ever sit down to yourself and think, I'm going to subvert this trope? Or if you do write something that is a little more subverting of a trope, does that come from the writing process?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know that I've ever sat down and consciously thought, like, I'm going to subvert a talk show trope or something. But you often start off writing like a familiar scene, like a talk show, like we were saying, and just think like, well, what could go wrong here? What could make this weird? So I don't know that it's consciously trying to subvert it, but
And what's interesting about that is that most of the time the joke in a talk show sketch is either the host or the guests are wildly mismatched, or one of those two groups is extremely weird.
yeah,
Right.
for sure.
And that is not happening at all. The topics are serious. That's not what's at stake, or that's not what's at issue. It's the format of the show. And again, his unwillingness to change that format.
That's a really good point. Yeah, it's not a weird host or a weird guest. It's the show itself that is weird.
Right. And I think that drives it kind of two of the different, well, there are obviously more than two, but two of the different approaches sometimes in sketch comedy. It's either the premise is weird or you've put a weird character in a normal premise.
Right.
Right.
And this is a situation where we expect a weird character, but instead, because of the time thing, because of it moving backwards in time, we get a normal character who, because he is frustrated, becomes funny, but he's in a weird premise.
Yeah.
Right. But I think there's so for me, like when I write a sketch, we talked about this being a high concept, like difficult to pull off almost sketch. Like I think most writers wouldn't even like pursue a sketch like this because it's difficult to pull off.
Yeah, it's like, first of all, just thinking of doing it this way, I think that took a pretty big leap right there, and then to be able to pull it off, I'm jumping ahead a little bit in the format of our show, but we're going to talk about how much we like these and rate them later on. I wouldn't change anything about this sketch. I don't think there's a way that I can't think of anything that would make it better at all.
The only thing I would be interested in seeing is Mr. Show famously bookends their sketches going into the next sketch.
Yep.
And, I believe we all watched this just on YouTube or what have you, where you only see this clip. I would have loved to see how they led into this sketch and how they lead out of it.
I
Do
actually
you know?
looked up. I watched.
Please.
Yeah.
I found the whole episode on some, probably not legally, on some site, and watched.
It's
watched
okay.
it.
I bought the DVDs. That covers everybody at the table.
Yeah, because I was going to mention that the lead-in sketch was when he first starts. He was like, "Oh, well, talking about how rock music, like the lyrics,
That's 2 weeks from now, right? I
Our
think was the
youth,
show.
yeah, it's 2 weeks from now, and that was leading in from a sketch where there was a metal band, Titanica, who had a song called like "Try Suicide."
Oh, and they
like,
talked
the boy
about
was in the hospital
that
'cause
kid.
he had
Oh my
done it.
God. Oh, gee, I remember that one.
Yeah.
Woo.
So that was the lead in. And then the next show was I forget. And it was the title of the episode. It was like the creature from the ghost of the thing.
the ghost of the creature. Yes.
Yeah.
That was,
So that was the next program that was going to be up on this channel, the Convoluted Network.
Yeah.
The Convoluted Network.
Yes.
I love that.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a good
I want
setup
to know
for a
what the
show.
other shows are
on the Convoluted Network.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would watch an episode that was just the shows on the Convoluted Network.
Yeah.
Hopping around.
I would actually, I think I might just watch one of the shows on the Convoluted Network. I don't know about that if they wanted to.
It's very difficult to get.
Yeah. Yeah. You have to go through this whole thing. You have to have
Fuck
cable
you,
and
Michael.
satellite.
Oh, that's awful. That's excellent, but that was awful. David Cross is great at yelling.
Yes.
What about the way he yells is so funny? Anyone?
He means it. That's he really sells it. I believe that all of his characters are about ready to do something drastic.
He's actively sweating
Yeah.
the whole time.
Yeah.
Just his physicality with it. He is smoking on set, and his hand, the jitters that he has when he's holding that cigarette is, he's a man that is maybe 2 minutes from snapping or perhaps about to have some sort of medical incident.
Now, Sarah, when you're writing a sketch that has somebody get angry, do you write a sketch where someone, do you ever do that? A sketch where somebody gets angry?
I've probably written one, yeah.
Does that depend more on Seth just spoke to David Cross selling it very well? But when you're approaching that and maybe you have the actor in mind who's going to play it, is it more about the words that you can put down on the page or knowing how the actor is going to sell it? Because I know often in sketch comedy, when you do it live, especially if it's an angry monologue or something like that, it's very likely that the words aren't going to be exactly what you've written down, and a character may just be channeling that anger. I think that happens a lot.
Yeah.
Where does the writing kind of trusting the actor? Is there a divide there? Is it a symbiosis? What do you think?
Oh, I think symbiosis is a good way of putting it. I was trying to think of how to describe it. Yeah. And I'd be curious to hear how Bad Medicine does it too. I think
excellently.
A lot of perfectly. A lot of times I'll write out the dialogue and I think it's fun. But then there is this process of, when you're putting it up on your feet, you see how it actually works.
Sure.
And a lot of times the actor has suggestions or they're just going with the flow and come up with something much better than what I've written. Happens sometimes. So I think it's a joint process between the writer and the actor.
Yeah, I think one of the things that works well in this, and that I often think works well, is that he, as angry as he doesn't get less articulate. He's like still just more vehemently explaining the concept.
Yeah.
Like in the same words, in the same, kind of phrasing each time, but he's still getting mad.
Real quick, anything, we talked about things we changed. Nobody really wants to change anything. Michael, would you change anything?
I'm still not sure I understand what's happening in the sketch. I probably wouldn't change anything because I don't know what's going on. So if I change something, the whole thing might fall apart.
Sarah, anything?
No, I can't think of anything I would change. It's a perfect structure.
Perfect.
I love it.
Seth?
I'm already on record as not changing anything about this sketch. And if you would, you are a communist.
Is that so bad?
Yeah, you're right, exactly.
No.
I don't know anymore.
Yeah.
I don't know. Facebook is so confusing. All right, time for final thoughts. Sarah, as the guest, why don't you come up with some kind of rating system or scale for us to judge today's sketches on?
All right. How about, in honor of David Cross's hair in Pre-Tape Call-In Show, can we go with out of, how many hairs do you think he has on his head? Like 4,000? Let's go with out of 4,000 hairs.
4,000 hairs.
That's just a guesstimate.
That's it's an educated guesstimate.
It's an educated guesstimate, and I won't take any offense about talking about people's hair or lack thereof.
Seth has a receding hairline.
Yes, I've at this table
in this very visual
got
podcast.
the least on my scalp. So picture that, people.
All right, Sarah, how many follicles would you give Corn Maze?
Corn Maze, I would give 3,900 out of 4,000 follicles.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a strong follicle count. You're feeling pretty good if
It's
that's
a high
what you're...
follicle score.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And how about for the Pre-Taped Call-In Talk Show?
I would go 3,999.99 repeating.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't want to give him a
I don't want to
perfect
give it a
score,
perfect
right,
score because there's
right.
always room for improvement.
And then I think it's... And you like that one more than the sketch that you brought in even.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
All right, there you go.
High praise.
Clearly. Michael, what about you? How many follicles?
I would also probably go with like 3,900 for Corn Maze. It was just so different from anything that I'd seen that I appreciated that. Yeah, it was nice.
Absolutely.
And I gotta give more like 2,000, I think, to David Cross and Mr. Show for Pre-Taped Call-In Show, because I spent it really wasn't until the payoff that I was really enjoying it, and I still think it was a great sketch, but only 2,000 follicles, great. But still great. You could have a great hairline with 2,000 follicles.
That ring around the side, maybe with 2,000.
Yeah. I speak as a man with about like 40,000 follicles. So
Yes.
Michael has a full beard.
it's
For
not
me,
just the beard.
Oh, God. For me, I would give the corn maze sketch. Oh, geez. I really like both of these sketches. I
Yeah.
don't want to just mimic what Sarah said.
No, it's a hard call.
Let's see. I would give it... I'll go with 3,500 follicles because I think I would have ended it like right after Corn Maze. I think I would have given it the hard stop. For pre-taped call and talk show, I will also give it 3,500 follicles because, as Michael said, it is a little convoluted. And I think if I'd been watching it on
on the
TV in
convoluted
1996 or whatever, I might have been like, well, what did I just watch? And the ability now to be able to rewatch something makes it easier to understand.
Well, all right. I think I'm going to give Corn Maze 3,750 follicles out of a possible 4,000. I'm going to say this because I actually kind of like Sarah's earlier suggestion for how it should go. We show the Corn Maze, we pull out, and then Rob People says, Corn Maze. And that was just an excuse for me to do that again. Sorry, people. And as for pre-taped call-in show, I am going to, you know what? I'm going to do it. I'm going to give it 4,100 out of 4,000
Whoa.
follicles.
Wow, so we got some plugs.
That's
in
right.
already.
Rogaine
That's right. He
here.
went in there. He got a little Rogaine.
Performance
and
enhancing.
Wow,
it's
yeah.
coming
Yeah.
back. Yep.
Those PEDs.
So do we add up the follicles then? Or how
Nope.
does this- no.
No.
There's no addition needed. That would be way above our math abilities. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Sketch Nerds. A special thanks to our guest, Sarah Fell. Real quick, Sarah, can you tell us where we can find more about your work and your sketch group's work?
Oh, sure, yeah. And first of all, thank you so much for having me on. This was such a treat.
Oh, of
I
course.
love talking sketch, so this is fun.
Yeah, absolutely. We loved having you.
Great. So my sketch group, Frankie, you can find us on Facebook at Frankie Sketch Comedy. We are also on Twitter now.
Oh, wow.
As we said, perfectly timed before the whole Twitter experiment falls apart. Frankie Sketch DC. And we're on Instagram, Frankie Sketch Comedy.
Awesome. Well, we look forward to seeing more of you guys on stage and videos.
Yeah. Oh, and I should have meant, we probably will have shows coming up. We have a show. We'll be performing at a sketch showcase at Dojo, at which Bad Medicine is also performing.
I believe we are, yeah.
January 27th, which might be before this episode airs. So if you're listening in the future, I hope you like that show. And you can check our Facebook to see when else we might be performing.
Well, thank you, Sarah. You can find out more about Sketch Nerds and Bad Medicine at badmedicinecomedy.com/sketchnerds, where you can also find links to the sketches we discussed today. You can find this podcast and previous episodes wherever you get your podcasts. For Sarah Fell, Seth Alcorn, and Michael Alvino, I'm Andy Weld. Thanks for listening to Sketch Nerds.
Thank you for listening. This episode was produced by Isaiah Hedden and recorded in Washington, D.C. The closing music tracks were provided by SoundtrackForEverything.com. All clips in this podcast were used in compliance with the U.S. Copyrights Act Fair Use Exemption for criticism and commentary. The Sketch Nerds podcast is brought to you by the sketch comedy group Bad Medicine, DC's best sketch comedy about the worst of humanity. For showtimes, videos, and funny t-shirts, please visit badmedicinecomedy.com.